You're tuned into the Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast, brought to you by Zeno Pucks. Here are your hosts, Andy and Brian Matusi.
Welcome back to Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast presented by Zeno Pucks. Andrew and I are here today, and we have a ton of stuff to go over, including some breaking news that we found out literally within the last minute and a half. So shout out to your wife for catching that before we started the show, but we'll get to that in a second. Real quick, for those of you on audio, and I guess this never occurred, well, really to either of us, we don't really ever plug our social media stuff on the show because if you watch on video, it's actually displaying on banners. But for those of you who follow the show and want to follow us on social media to stay up to date, please don't forget to. The show is on Instagram at Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. I myself am on Instagram at Brian Fresh Ice. And of course, you can check out the website as well, freshicehockeypodcast.com. But I just figured we always have it going with the banners, so we never mention it. So, yes, please feel free to follow us on social media. Again, that's at Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast and at Brian Fresh Ice, both on Instagram. Not really active on X or Twitter or whatever you call it. Another thing before we get to the breaking news. Last week on the show, I mentioned that the Saginaw Spirit won the Memorial Cup, which is true. And I mentioned on there as well that T.J. Ginla was on that team, son of NHL legend Jerome Ginla. And T.J. was not on that team. It was a different top 10 prospect I was thinking of. That was Zane Perrick, who was on Saginaw. T.J. Ginla played for Kelowna of the Western Hockey League. So I don't know how I mixed that up. But yeah, the player I was thinking of was Zane Perrick because I knew somebody from that team was a top 10 draft pick. I think I had just heard so much of Ginla stuff that it was like, it's like when you cram for your final exams, everything just gets disorganized in your thoughts.
It's all right. You're allowed to make mistakes. Hell, look at Sergei Bobrovsky in Game 4. But that's a story for a different part of the show.
Yes. So we have some breaking news. And again, shout out to your wife / my sister-in-law for catching this because we were not going to be on Facebook or Instagram or anything to see this. As of about 10 minutes ago, the Columbus Blue Jackets announced they have relieved head coach Pascal Vincent of his duties. The club has no real further comment on it at this time, but they've said they will begin the search for a new head coach immediately. We're both partial to the Blue Jackets, of course. You're local to the team now, and I kind of just jumped on the ship with you just so we could cheer for the same team for once.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this since this show's inception. This whole staff was a mess top to bottom. They go out, they fire Kekalainen during the regular season. They bring in Don Waddell to be the new GM. They may even eventually bring in a new president to replace John Davidson. Now, finally, we see the last piece has really fallen here, though. Pascal Vincent's on his way out. For a club that's looking to turn things around and probably wanting to do it sooner than later, what do you think of this move?
Dude, this was a long time. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, we've been talking about this since we started the show. This is long overdue. The first step in the right direction was firing Jarmo Kekalainen, and this is the next best move. I mean, they're trying to turn things around, and they're going to try and do it fast too, because they do not want to be in the same position at the end of next season that they were in at the end of this season. So I think this is an excellent idea. I should point out that they did mention that they have nobody in mind yet as far as a new coach, but they did say the search for a new head coach will begin immediately. So we'll keep you guys posted on that as we know more, but there's definitely a silver lining somewhere for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And for us too, because I think it's safe to say, are probably the first hockey podcast to report on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the timing was very favorable for us. So we'll see what happens. But as for the Jackets, look, Pascal Vincent was put in an impossible position. Everything that happened with Mike Babcock last offseason, they fire him right before training camp starts and bring in Vincent. The team already wasn't that great on paper. They were going to need a veteran coach like Babcock, not him, Babcock per se, but a veteran coach that could really handle a team that's in a tough spot. Instead, they bring in a guy with no NHL head coaching experience. It really just kind of falls apart. They lose a couple guys to injury. They didn't really play that great this season. I think going forward, there's a couple of good head coach candidates still available. I think their team's going to have to take a really good hard look at who they want to go forward here, because now they're going to get to the point where it's really time to start building this club. They have another high draft pick this year. They picked Fantilli last year. They had a lot of good, I don't want to say breakout seasons, but some borderline breakout seasons from their Russians this year. Marchenko, Chitakov, and Voronkov. They had some really good play throughout the lineup. I think we're going to see Juracek come up with them next year finally. So there are pieces here to do something good. And I think for the Jackets, I think Don Waddell was smart enough to know from the moment he took this job that you had to find a coach who could really help these guys take the next step, because Vincent just was not it.
Yeah, if they held on to Pascal Vincent, I was going to really start questioning things and start questioning people's credibility, for that matter, in the front office. So I think, again, this is a really good move. I'm excited to see what it leads to. I'm curious to see who they end up going with, because, I mean, there's some good names out there right now.
Yeah.
But I don't want to speculate on anything, because that usually just doesn't bode well for us. So.
Yeah, that's fair. So we'll keep our eyes on that. But I do think for the Jackets going forward, it's going to be good to bring in somebody who knows what the hell they're doing, because Vincent was just simply not the guy. Now,
correct.
Let's talk about some teams that are still playing hockey, and by some I mean two, because that's all that's left, at least in the NHL. The Stanley Cup final. Since we last spoke, the Panthers 3-1 series lead right now. They take games 1, 2, and 3 in pretty convincing fashions. And they come out in game 4 and fall flat on their face. And to that, I want to get into our lightings, property management, tough look of the week for all your lawn care, landscaping, and snow removal needs. Give Lightings a call. They do it all. Andrew, since you are our tough look of the week, why don't you tell everybody that listens to this show the wonderful idea you had while you were at the Hockey Hall of Fame on Saturday, right before game 4?
Yeah. Look, I don't believe in superstitions, but I'll take the brunt of this from the Panthers fans for this one. My wife and I were at the Hockey Hall of Fame this past weekend, the day of mere hours before game 4. And if you're a hockey fan, you know that the Stanley Cup is at the Hockey Hall of Fame, and you absolutely can bet your ass I touched it, and I don't care. And another thing, I'm not sorry, because there was no way in hell I was going in that great hall and not touching that cup. With that being said, the Panthers went on to lose 8-1 that night, and so I'll fall on the grenade for that one. My fault. But
so, Andrew was talking. If you're friends with Andrew on social media, you know he was talking all Saturday about all this. This is the end of the season for Edmonton. Get the brooms out.
Yeah,
this is a message I have from you at 10:29 on Central Time Saturday morning.
Happy
with no context at all. It just says I touched it. I don't give a fuck.
Yep. Yep. And you knew exactly what I meant, and I don't care. The good news is there's no photographic evidence of me touching the cup.
There's no evidence, but that's why I figured I'd bring up the message, because there were no pictures of you touching it, but you did.
I did.
And then the Panthers lost 8-1. I'm not saying there's a such thing as jinxes, but if there is, you hit the mother load on that one, buddy.
Well, I mean, I've already been jinxing them since, what was it, March, saying they're going to win the cup this year, and I still stand by that. I mean, yeah, sorry I touched it, but I'm really not. It was worth it, and I don't care.
I truthfully don't believe either of these teams were capable of losing 4 games in a row, so I'm not entirely surprised the Oilers got going and they got all their big boys going in game 4. Look, it's a battle now. I mean, realistically, the Oilers, if they can come out and win game 5, I mean, we could really have a series here. And I think if you're a general hockey fan, you just want the season to go longer. I think that's what you're cheering for. But if you're a Panthers fan, you're wanting this to be done at home so the season can be done. You can win the cup and you can win it at home. And this time, Andrew won't be at the Hockey Hall of Fame to put the whammy on it. So he'll be in the comfort of his own home and he'll be watching. So, great look Saturday night for the Oilers. But other than that, this has been Florida's series, man. They have, if you take game 4 out of the equation, I mean, they didn't even play what I thought was their best hockey in game 1. They still walk away with the win. And in games 2 and 3, they were just unreal.
Correct. And I want to point out that something I heard Elliot Friedman say on 32 Thoughts when I was listening to it on my way back yesterday. And I thought it was an excellent point. As far as the Panthers losing game 4, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but what he essentially said was, a team as good as Florida doesn't let one loss affect them. They will recover from this. They will come out guns a-blazing tomorrow, which is Tuesday night. Game 5, I am willing to bet you that this series ends tomorrow night in Sunrise. And I will say, if for whatever reason Edmonton does come out with a win, there is no doubt in my mind then after that this series goes 7 games.
I was going to say the same thing. So I was interested. I was going to ask you what you thought, but I'm definitely of the opinion, listen, if Edmonton can drag this thing back home, and I think that one of the I don't know if it was McDavid or who it was that said they want to drag the Panthers back to Alberta. I think if they can pull a game 6 out of this, I think they can even pull a game 7.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying not to sound biased here like always, but I think no matter what happens, the Panthers come away with the cup.
It's like I said, it's hard to see either of these two losing 4 in a row. In the same way the Oilers didn't get swept, I don't see them reverse sweeping the Panthers, especially given 2 of these next 3 potential games are in Florida. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, there's just no. And here's another thing I want to point out: there is no way in hell Florida loses 4 games in a row. I'm sorry, it's just not a realistic thing. I mean, anything is possible in the grand scheme of things, but it's just not realistic. Florida's not going to lose 4 in a row. Paul Maurice said yesterday, we came to Edmonton to get a split and we got it. So now we're headed back home.
Which I thought was a little bit of lip service too. I think he was just dodging. He was dodging bullets like Neo, just trying to avoid the obvious questions. But even though he was kind of being a little bit wry with his expression and everything like that, I do think he really did drive the point across. Look, obviously they don't want to come out of there losing 8-1 in game 4, but ultimately he's right. I mean, you could win by 1 million. The series is still 3-1 and you're going back home. So I don't think Florida's genuinely worried. I think Bob having 1 bad game after having 20 amazing ones, there's nothing to be worried about. So I think the Panthers close it out, but we'll see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. Like I told you when I was talking to you earlier today, I wish there was hockey on tonight, but we can't all be so fortunate always. But I think it's going to go well. I think Florida's going to bounce right the hell back. And if you recall, originally I did say Panthers in 5, and so I think this is going to be an absolute bloodbath of a game tomorrow night. It's going to be good either way. So sorry, there's a cat right here whining, so bear with me. But I personally think that as far as the team as a whole under Paul Maurice, you can kind of compare it to flying a plane. If something goes wrong on the plane, if the captain's not panicking, your passengers aren't going to panic, and that applies perfectly here with the Florida Panthers. If Paul Maurice isn't worrying, then I promise you the players aren't worrying either. So if you're a Panthers fan, there's no reason to panic yet. If we go to a game 6 and they win game 6, then we'll panic. But for right now, we're still up 2 games in this series. There's nothing to worry about right now.
I know now. And to that point, I think it's perfectly sensible to start worrying after game 5 if the Panthers don't close it out, because now you lose on home ice, and it's like theoretically you come off an 8-1 loss, you come home and lose. Now you have to fly 2,500 miles back to Alberta, and it basically in a must-win game, because if you lose that game, then you're coming back home for a game 7. But that's all that travel when you could have closed it out 2 other times. So we'll see what happens, but we are going to kind of play this by ear. Whenever the Stanley Cup is awarded, we will do a show either that night or the following night. It'll probably be the following night, but if the Panthers do win tomorrow, we'll be back Wednesday to recap the Stanley Cup. And I'm looking forward to it. So far, honestly, for a 3-1 series, I've really liked the hockey. I know the results haven't been there for the Oilers specifically, except for game 4. But you can really, and we said it, I think, in the last show, you can tell these are the 2 best teams in the league. I mean, they really are just both incredible. And part of me doesn't want the series to end yet, because I'm like, it's such good hockey and it's some of the best players in the world in this series. But I'm like, Jesus Christ, for the Panthers, you really don't want to have to see him go back to Edmonton for a game 6.
No, I don't. And I will be pissed off if that happens. But like I said, I have not lost confidence. As a Panthers fan, I've seen people talk about it online. No, the Oilers have not instilled any doubt. And if you are doubting the Panthers right now, you need to stop. Like I said, there's no reason to panic
there's one
yet.
game, yeah.
Exactly. So, and everybody's allowed to have a bad day.
Yep. So it's like I said, I think the trouble and worrying starts to come if they don't win Game 5. Then you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, then you really got to regroup and figure out what the hell's going on.
But you know what? It happened to the LA Kings in 2012. They go up 3-0 on the Devils. They lose Game 4. They lose Game 5. They come back home and win Game 6, like 6-2 or 6-1 or something ridiculous.
Right.
So now the scenario is a little different because again, if there is a Game 6, it'll be in Edmonton, so the stakes are a little different. But same principle. You can. All it takes for the Panthers now, all it takes is one good 60-minute effort, and they'll have the cup. For the Oilers, they have to still win 3 more games against the best team probably in the league.
Well, on top of that, I think it's worth noting that one, the Panthers have already proved they can win in Edmonton. They've already won a game in Edmonton. Edmonton has not won in Florida yet. So, I mean, as far as playoffs go, so
they hadn't beat them there in a regular season either.
That's correct. They did not. So I think that's worth noting that Edmonton has not proved they can win in Florida yet now. And I know anything can happen tomorrow. So, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but Florida's already won one in Edmonton. So bear that in mind too, just because if we end up going to a Game 6, that doesn't guarantee anything except that we're going to get to see Shania Twain.
Yep, pretty much. A couple salary cap related items real quick, and then we'll talk about the Calder Cup final. The salary cap going up 5.4%, going up to $88 million from $83.5 million that it was this year. The cap as far as salary cap stuff goes too, a lot of you who are familiar with the website capfriendly.com know that it was recently just purchased by the Washington Capitals. And so starting July 5th, it will no longer be available to the public. The part of the agreement, I guess, is that they're going to have it available until free agents or the draft and a little bit after free agency. But after that, it's going to be going away. So it's going to leave a lot of people in the dark on salary stuff. I know Puckpedia exists, but it's not as user-friendly a platform as Cap-Friendly is. And I mean, I know we've been in this situation before. We lost General Fanager a bunch of years ago when Vegas bought them. We lost Cap Geek a long time ago when the founder of Cap Geek passed away. And so we've been in this situation before. The overreaction on social media has kind of confused me because it's happened before, but people are kind of vilifying the Capitals for this. So I'm like, well, nobody went after Vegas when they bought General Fanager. But the point is, we've been here before. I'm sure before too long, there will be something else to replace Cap Friendly. It'll just be a matter of waiting. But yeah.
Well, I was going to point out too, I mean, you and I are both huge fans of the 32 Thoughts podcast with Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman. And I was listening to them the other day, and a lot of teams in the league are kind of admiring what Washington is doing with Cap Friendly because they all want their own platform similar to that. And not necessarily one for each individual team, but they want one for just the whole league that everybody has access to, not on a public platform.
Yeah, and the NHL itself doesn't want that. Gary Bettman has been quoted as saying that people don't have interest in that, which he's so out of touch with reality. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But
and that's they spent a whole segment talking about that too. And I don't want to sit here and pretty much repeat what they said. If you want to hear their take on it, you should be listening. If you're a hockey fan, you should be listening to 32 Thoughts anyway. It's probably the best hockey podcast out there.
Probably the two biggest hockey insiders. I would put especially Frege, but Merrick's definitely up there with the likes of Bob McKenzie and Frank Saravalli. But it's just really good stuff. They have ears to the ground all over, with pretty much every team in the league. So it gives you a good feel for what's going on in the league and where things are headed. Definitely worth listening to if you don't already. But I would have to imagine if somebody's dug far enough to find our show that they already know that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're I don't want to say we're bottom of the barrel, but
we are. Okay, the Calder Cup final. Well, we talked about it on the last show. The Admirals and the Monsters both fell off. The Monsters, boy, did they make a run at it, but fell just short. Game 7 in overtime. So the Calder Cup finals already underway. It is a tied series at 1-1 right now between Hershey and Coachella Valley. Just want to give those teams their props again. Congratulate them for winning their conferences for the second straight year.
I just want to take some time to commend the Cleveland Monsters real quick. And this is solely coming from me as a Cleveland Monsters fan and season ticket holder. This is a team that was absolutely awful last year. I mean, god awful. And they not only did they make it to the conference final, were down 3-0 in the series, brought it all the way back to force a Game 7 and took Game 7 to overtime against the defending Cup champs. Just an absolutely incredible season. The way that my wife and I have been treated as season ticket holders and as fans this year has been incredible. The games are always a great time, even if they lose. And the fans there are just incredible too. And we're just so lucky to have been a part of such a great season this year. And I'm really looking forward to next year, and Monsters hockey is definitely where it's at.
Oh, there you go. I like it. By the way, for those of you listening, I'm not even sure if you can hear my fan in the background, I do apologize, but it's about 93 degrees right now, and my air conditioning does not work. So I'm just getting by here. I got headphones and a hat on and drinking all the water I can, but I got to survive. Although my wife and I are addressing that problem in the next few days. So thank God, because it's hot.
And I want to say that it is also 92 degrees here in the Cleveland area. And
But
if you can hear my fan, my AC works no problem. And if you can hear my fan, I'm not sorry, because I'm not sweating my ass off while I'm doing this. So
that's fair. Well, it's what's worse is I am sweating mine off, but you can still hear my fan. So
that's all right.
That's all right. We'll get through it. We'll get through this as a team. All right. Moving on here. So real quick while I pull up the next thing. I mentioned the salary cap going up to $88 million. It's the largest single year increase since 2019. The pandemic really brought things to a screeching halt. And so the cap was pretty much stagnant for a couple of years, but now we're going to start to see some pretty significant rises. We're going to be over 90 million after next season. And I would assume in the next 5 to 6 years, we'll be over 100 million. So good to see the league growing. And right now the Stanley Cup final, I think, had some of its largest viewership ever during Game 4. So very cool. See the game growing. I know the sport is constantly getting in its own way when it's trying to grow, but it is succeeding despite itself. It just needs to keep going.
I need to add something to that in regards to your comment about the game growing. And I don't want to pat us on the back, but I've had multiple people tell me who listen to our show. Some of them we know, some of them we don't know that well. But people have legitimately told me that this show has made them start getting into hockey. Like it piqued their interest and they started watching hockey, and now they're watching this amazing Stanley Cup final series and they're loving every bit of it. And I just want to say that was the whole purpose of us even doing this show to begin with. So it's just really cool to see that it is in one way or another helping the game grow. And that's exactly what we wanted out of it.
Yep. Also, a quick shout out as well, since we're on that topic of people getting into hockey. Our mother, who had zero interest in this sport at all, we would drive her nuts with it. Our mother the other night was losing her shit watching the game, swearing at the TV, swearing in text. So, Ma, I just want to say we love you, and I can't believe I can't believe we got you watching hockey, but here she is. So I just told her don't be a Wild fan, because I cry myself to sleep at night.
Yeah, that I will say that is pretty cool.
That blows me away. So, all right, let's move on here. Now, we mentioned the Jackets at the top of the show firing their head coach. Another thing coming out of Columbus is that Patrik Laine has formally requested a trade from the team. It hasn't worked out very well for him there. He's dealt with injury. He's been in the player assistance program. This is a guy that badly needs a fresh start. I was really hoping it would work in Columbus, because for Laine, who's not even 26 years old yet, it'd really be nice for him to break out with the Jackets, but I think a fresh start's exactly what's needed here. So the team and the player are working together to find him a new home and get him the fresh start that he very well deserves.
Yeah, he hasn't been. It's no secret he has not been the same since he left Winnipeg from day one, and I mean, we won't know the true reasoning behind it, and quite frankly, it's nobody's business except his when it comes right down to it. But I agree. Definitely a change of scenery is needed. I think a fresh start is good for anybody, but especially somebody who's going through whatever it is that he's dealing with. I think that's the right move. And I personally, again, don't want to speculate, but I say try out Utah.
Yeah, I think as we get into the summer, there's going to be a lot of Utah stuff going on.
Big time.
couple personnel changes around the league as well. We mentioned the Jackets firing their head coach. The San Jose Sharks have hired their replacement head coach, bringing in Ryan Warsofsky, brother, I believe, of former NHL player David Warsofsky. So that's a little fun tidbit. So he's going to take over as San Jose's head coach. It's starting to sound from what we've heard is that Celebrini is going to play one more year at college, which is fine. The Sharks still suck. So, and, while they continue to build up the team, it's not a bad idea for him. I think you and I had the conversation, and I believe it was you that felt like it was appropriate for him to go back. But I think one more year at university will do him fine, and then he'll come back with the Sharks. And I think him and Smith and whatever other free agents they can bring in there. Look, San Jose is a pretty nice place to play weather-wise. It's a really nice arena. There's going to be guys that'll want to go there with what they're starting to build. I think San Jose's big issue, and we'll talk about this when we get to our all of our teams that missed the playoffs, which will not be on this show because we had so much news this week, and then the Panthers almost won the Stanley Cup in a week span. So, but with the Sharks, the goaltending there is just so rough. They got to get that ironed out. They got to start bringing in some free agents to teach these younger guys how to play. But I think bringing in a coach who's got, some history as a head coach, not in the NHL, but he's coached before. I think a fresh set of eyes will do them some good. It doesn't look like there's going to be too many personnel changes there as far as the players go, but they're starting to build. They want to do this the right way. They don't want to rush it. So I'll be interested to see where they are a year or two from now. But at least for this year, if Celebrini's not going to be there, I have to imagine they're looking at another bottom 10 finish.
And I mean, it is what it is. You don't want to knock Celebrini, if he decides especially deciding to go to school. I don't blame him. He can still play in college, and he's getting his education, which a lot of players actually do. So once they're done playing hockey, they can move on to bigger and better things as well. So I think it's a good idea on his part. As far as the Sharks go, it's kind of been it's kind of been tough to watch them fall ever since they lost the Stanley Cup.
Lost their big four.
Yeah. And it's been rough to watch because they were always a team that you didn't want to play. And now it's like you get a matchup against the Sharks and you're like, yay. So I'm interested to see how things end up for them. So we'll see what Celebrini does, and we'll see how this looks once we get into the season.
Moving on, in St. Louis, Alex Steen is going to take over as the special assistant to the general manager, Doug Armstrong, and then in 2026-2027, he will take over as the team's GM. Doug Armstrong has been in St. Louis for a long time now. I think he's been there almost 15 years. He's been there a very long time. He's won him a Stanley Cup, but they're ushering in kind of a new era of sorts in St. Louis. And I think they want a guy with a fresher set of eyes on the team to really build it. Steen played with the Blues, I believe, when they won the Stanley Cup, and he's been in the league recently. He knows the direction this game's going. I think this is a really good move. A guy that's loved by the city, a guy that's played a long time, who's a really effective player. I think this is exactly the kind of hire you want. And I think for Doug Armstrong and the organization, it's good on them to realize that change is needed before it gets too bad. The Blues didn't have a great year, but they weren't unwatchable. I know there was a little bit of the drama with Jordan Kyrou midway through the year, and it definitely wasn't a perfect season. But all things considered, to recognize that there's a problem well before it becomes a big problem is a good thing. There's not a ton of holes on their roster. If they can continue to get good goaltending out of Jordan Binnington and Joel Hofer, I don't think they'll have issues going forward. But there's some tinkering that needs to be done with the lineup, and I think bringing in a guy like Steen will really help. Will go a long way to helping the Blues get back to being one of the most dominant teams in the league, like they were for the entire 2010s decade.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent move. This is probably a bit of a stretch as far as making a comparison goes, but I would equate this to Steve Yzerman going to Detroit. Not exactly the same, but in the sense of he's very loved within the city. He played for the team. He won a championship with the team. And like you said, he played recently. He knows the direction where the league is going. This is perfect. So, and the best part is he's going on as a GM in training too. So they're not just throwing him to the wolves. He's going to get some hands-on experience while still being mentored into it. So I think this is great.
Worth noting for Yzerman is that he was already a good GM though when
Yes,
Detroit brought him in.
correct.
I mean, he listened. I know Breezeball was the GM when Tampa won their cups. That was Yzerman's team.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I wasn't comparing them in that sense. I was just saying, as far as the person they're hiring played for the team and is well loved within the organization. That's the comparison I was making.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But as Brian just said, yes, those were Yzerman's teams. And you see what almost happened with Detroit this year. They almost made it back in. You never, ever underestimate Stevie Y. But back to what we were saying.
We'll talk about the Wings at some point too this offseason, because there's some changes they're going to need there to stay relevant within the conference, but that's a later on thing. So yeah, I like the move for St. Louis. I think, again, getting ahead of something that's not a big problem yet is a huge step. They have a very good team. I mean, I personally don't think they're missing much to get back into the playoffs. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I want to move on now. And actually, before we get to our final portion of this podcast, first, Andrew, I want you to look and see if we have any questions. We forgot to do that before we started recording.
We have a great question, actually, real quick. Give me 1 second so I can pull it up.
We'll pull that up. And while you're doing that too, I think it's a good time to mention some of our sponsors and the people who help make this show possible.
Absolutely. I do have the question pulled up, but we're going to do the sponsors. So first up, as always, Fresh Ice is brought to you by our friends over at Xenopucks. Xenopucks make a top-tier off-ice practice puck designed for use on almost any off-ice surface. We've talked about it hundreds of times. You can use it on the floors in your house, whether they're wood or tile or carpet. It glides on concrete, asphalt. If you can think of it, this probably works on it. It's the same size and weight as a regulation hockey puck, 6 ounces. It's pretty solid, though. It is not made of rubber. So I would not recommend using this for a game, but it's great. You know, if you're just looking to practice your stick handling or your shot, whatever you want to do, you know, ice time's not always an option. And that's exactly why these guys made this, because they were living in Florida at the time. And as a former Floridian myself, it's a tough state to play hockey in. So they came up with this. Whatever off-ice alternative you're using that's not this, stop. Head over to xenopucks.com right now. Get yourself one of these bad boys. They're incredible. Make sure you also follow them over on their social media page, which is Instagram at Xenopucks, and that is XENOPUCKS. They are incredible. Make sure you check out their merch selection on their website as well, xenopucks.com.
That's right. And if you're going to be elevating your off-ice practice game, why don't you visit our friends at the Hockey Wraparound as well? They're going to offer you all kinds of products to help you out when you're not on the ice. So you get yourself some things like equipment drying racks. They have their own merch as well. You can get some new tape for your stick. And of course, if you got that stick, you know they're expensive. You know you don't want to burn through your awesome tape job. Pick up their premier product, which is their blade protector. It's just a vinyl wraparound, goes right on the blade of your stick. It's going to protect your investment off the ice. So stop by Xenopucks, get a puck from them, and go visit our friends at hockeywraparound.com. Use the code FreshIcePod for 15% off your order. And now, and we lost Andrew's audio. Well, while Andrew's doing that,
I had my mic muted like an idiot. Sorry.
Why the hell
I
would
muted
you do
it.
that?
So
the only guy I know that mutes his mic when he's trying to record something. All right.
So I'm going to talk about the Warrior for Life one real quick. Again, they are not an official sponsor of this show, but we had Bob Pizzini on here, Mark Mowers, Andrew Alberts. Mark and Andrew are both former NHL players. Bob is an award-winning CEO. He's also a Navy Special Operations veteran and an all-around hockey fanatic. If you missed those episodes, you need to go back and check them out. They were 3 great episodes with 3 great guys. All 3 of them are ambassadors for the Warrior for Life Fund. And in a nutshell, what the Warrior for Life Fund does is they help military service members and their families transition back into the civilian world, whether it be coming home from a deployment or just getting out of the military. And they do that through the game of hockey. And again, in a nutshell, they get these veterans to come out and play on teams, and they'll they're partnered with the Boston Bruins alumni organization. They'll play games against the Boston Bruins alumni. They recently just partnered with the NHL, so I'm super excited to see where that goes. But they're out there trying to do things for military families to help ease some of the mental stress that goes with transitioning back into the civilian world. And as a former veteran myself, I can attest that that goes a very long way. That being said, it's not an easy or a cheap task to do. So if you're interested in helping the Warrior for Life Fund help America's veterans, you can head over to warriorforlifefund.org right now and make a donation today.
All righty. Okay, there we go. All right, so to close out the show, we're going to address one more thing, and then we sounds like we have a listener question to get to. So out of left field at the end of the PWHL season, Minnesota announced that they will not be bringing back GM Natalie Darwitz. Reports came out that there was some level of infighting between Darwitz and head coach Ken Klee, and as well as team captain Kendall Coyne-Schofield. And I haven't really seen anything on what the actual feuds were about, but ultimately it seemed as though most of the players sided with the coach in this feud. And so with the league owning all 6 PWHL teams, the decision was made not to bring Darwitz back for next season. So very, very odd to see a team that wins a championship fire their GM, but here we are.
Well, you never know what's going on behind closed doors too. I think that's really what that comes down to. You just don't know.
Yeah,
so
it's very
it would
on
be
brand for Minnesota sports, though.
Well, I mean, ultimately, it'd be wrong for us to sit here and just make assumptions. So I won't do that. But like I said, you never know what's going on.
I was just really like, I don't want to say fascinated was the right word, but just like, what the hell? I'm like more intrigued, like what could have possibly led to this. But eventually, I'm sure we'll know and time will tell. But definitely kind of a shocker to see a team that was a championship team and then the GM's gone before the draft. So,
yeah.
All right, Andrew, we have a listener question. Who is it and what is it?
So this comes to us. This is good. This is a really good question. This comes to us from Corey in Liverpool. He says, "Hey guys, big fan of the show. I was never into hockey until I started listening to your podcast, which I stumbled upon on Spotify by accident.
Really?
Yes.
Holy shit.
I started listening to the show back at the end of March, and I haven't been able to stop watching hockey since. I don't know too much about the sport yet, but I'm slowly learning through the help of your show. I just wanted to ask you in regards to Game 4, why did they wait until the Panthers were down 5 goals to pull Bobrovsky?"
Here's the thing, and that's a really good question. First of all, I want to say you said it was Corey, right?
Corey from Liverpool.
Corey, thank you for tuning into our show from across the pond. That's that means a lot. So to answer your question, a lot of times, and this is especially true in playoffs, generally speaking in hockey games, you'll see a goalie get pulled after, a team's down by 3 or 4. A lot of times in the playoffs, coaches want to stick with their guy. You don't want to shake a guy's confidence by putting him on a short leash. We saw this with Tampa Bay and whose goalie's Andrei Vasilevsky in the 2022 Stanley Cup final against Colorado. I think there was a game he gave up 6 or 7 goals and they never pulled him at all. Some goalies are really proud guys. They don't want to give up the net even if it's a bad night. But I think a couple things went into the decision not to pull Bobrovsky. I think the first is that, again, that's their guy. They want to give him the chance to right the ship. And when they realize, okay, now he's given up 5, let's give him a break and get ready for the next one. But I think the other thing is the Panthers had played so well to that point in the series that you're like, hey, we can come back. If they get a couple quick ones, we can get right back in this and get our goalie the win. Because the other side of the coin is, let's say it was 4-1 at one point. Let's say the Panthers come back and score 3 goals, they tie the game, then they win it in overtime or something. Well, that game would have won them the Stanley Cup. It would have been a lot better for the team to win it with Bobrovsky in the net than to win it with him on the bench, since he's been their guy all playoffs long. That's more of an opinion thing, but it's just something to consider as well. But the main thing is that a lot of times in the playoffs, coaches don't want to give their guys a short leash because you don't want to shake your goalie's confidence at this time of the season because the playoffs are so much more intense. You want your guys dialed in. You want to give them a chance to right any wrongs they've done.
I agree. Hold on, let me bring myself back up.
I was going to say,
okay.
yeah. For those of you on video, I was just staring at the camera for a second. I'm like, now what?
First thing I want to say, Corey, thank you so much for listening to the show. I think it's incredible that you found us by accident, and I'm overjoyed that we inspired you to start watching hockey, especially us just being two nobody brothers that just decided to start a hockey podcast because we can never shut up about it. So that's incredible, and thank you. And I'm sorry I stumbled reading through your question. I was just so excited that somebody wrote us from overseas.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. To further Brian's point about how good the Panthers have played, watching that game, I didn't even start to panic when Edmonton scored 6. I'm like, this is the Florida Panthers. Anything's possible. So obviously once it was, 8-1, I was like, okay, we're done. But I still didn't lose hope even after they pulled Bob. And I want to point out, if you take away all the goals Bob let in, Anthony Stolarz came in and only let in 3 goals. That's really not that bad for a guy who hasn't played at all throughout these playoffs. He's been on the bench. All he's been doing is watching hockey. So to come in against a team as good as Edmonton and still only let in 3 goals, that's really not bad. You really have to rely, goaltending does win games to an extent, but the super important part of that happens on the other end of the ice. So Paul Maurice also said, my limit for Bob is 5. Anything after that, we're just torturing him mentally. And I agree with him. I think that's a good way to look at it. Now, do I think that's going to affect Bob's play in the next game? Only positively. I don't think he's going to be down in the dumps. I think he's going to be bouncing back, and he's going to be out with a vengeance. So
I think you're right on with that too. But if you saw him on the bench after he was pulled, there was a moment in the game where a puck flew towards the bench. He caught it and he tossed it to someone in the crowd, and the camera pans to him and he's smiling and talking with the trainer. I mean, look, he knows it wasn't his best night. He's not an idiot. I mean, he's not under some illusion that 5 goals against is a good night, but he knows that he knows he's going back home. He's going to have a chance to rebound in front of his home crowd that's going to be screaming his name at the top of their lungs that entire game. So I think he'll be fine. But yeah, Corey, just to circle back to your question, in the playoffs, it's just such a different animal. You always want to give your guys, especially your goalies, you want to give them a chance to right the ship because you've stuck with them all season long to this point. You don't want to give up on them now.
And I just want to say once again, thank you to Corey. Great question. And thank you again so much for listening to our show. And if you have a question that you want us to answer on the show, you can write us, send us an email. The email is Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. Or I'm sorry, there's 2 emails, freshicehockeypodcast@gmail.com and contact@freshicehockeypodcast.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave your questions in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure you like and subscribe as well.
That's right. Again, and before we go, follow us on Instagram and Facebook. The show is on Instagram and Facebook at Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. Myself, I'm on Instagram at Brian Fresh Ice. So I'm starting to make more reels and stuff. I feel like I'm like, well, I might as well promote the show I'm on.
It's a good idea.
Especially since I only made the Instagram since we have the podcast. I might as well do some level of promotion there. But yeah, so again, so those of you listening on audio, I'm sorry we haven't plugged these enough. I know our audience has grown pretty exponentially over the last couple of months. So for those of you unaware, again, we are on Instagram at Brian Fresh Ice, at Fresh Ice Hockey Podcast. Get those questions in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you comment, you like, and you subscribe. Growing on YouTube has been a chore for us, as well as growing on social media. So share this with your friends where you can, if you have anybody interested in hockey, and get those questions in. We are either going to be back Wednesday night, or when's game 6 would be Friday night, I believe. So we'll either be back Wednesday night, Saturday night, or
Tuesday.
Sunday or Tuesday. Yeah. So we'll see.
I would say let's just do this. We will be back the day after the Stanley Cup final ends. We'll call it that.
That's fair. In the meantime, Andrew and I may, just depending on our schedules, start recording the episodes of talking about the teams that missed the playoffs. We've run into a lot of obstacles with trying to get those shows recorded, but we need to get them done. So while they may not be your traditional podcast style, we'll probably have something posted with those in the coming weeks, because we're only going to be doing shows for another 4 weeks or so before we take a break for the summer.
Yes, and those shows won't be super long. They'll be probably about 30 minutes long, hopefully good enough for, your morning commute to work. So we'll keep you guys posted on that. And again, make sure you're following us on social media so you can stay up to date on the show and breaking news.
That's right. All right. So yeah, we will in all likelihood be back at the conclusion of the Stanley Cup final. I really hope you guys have enjoyed the series to this point. We kind of sold it as a big series. It's been a really fun series to watch. So I'm hoping we got some more exciting hockey ahead of us. We'll see you guys either in 2 days or 4 days or 7 days.
Either way, we will see you soon. And again, thank you to everybody who has tuned in, and thank you to Corey for writing the show. And thank you, as always, to our awesome sponsors.
All right. We'll see you guys sometime soon.
All righty. Take care and go Panthers.